Hi, welcome to Back to Excited, episode 155. My name is Arvin. Joining me as always, my colleague from pensionplanpuppets.com. It's Acting the Foolman.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing, Foolman?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I've been enjoying having hockey on in the evenings. It gives me more of a reason to, not have to work late, because now I can convince myself that I have to do my other job of watching the Leafs.
Right.
This is definitely not just a coping mechanism to deal with the fact that, North American society forces us to work too hard.
Yeah. Let's just try and focus on the Leafs being a nice consolation there, because that's too deep and will hurt us if we think about it too long. Yeah, you know what? And I don't think I ever got to the point where I was like, oh, I'm not going to watch the Leafs. That would have been delusional, and even I recognize that. But I'm surprised at how much I've been just happy to have them back.
Yeah,
they are fun.
It's funny, cause during the game, I'm kind of grumpily staring at the TV screen, but then I enjoy thinking about it afterwards.
So that's something, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, it's nice to have topics also. I think we tried to hang in as well as we could over the summer, finding stuff to talk about. But there's always that little stretch towards the end of August and the start of September where we're like, okay, we really could use some more material to talk about. So now we have some.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll start with some not fun material, which is that Peter Mrazek, who got injured halfway through his first game in the Leaf uniform, is going to be out for 2 weeks. Could have been worse. It's a groin injury. 2 weeks is not that long a time span to recover from something like that. But it does put the Leafs in a bit of a bind, and it put them in such a bind with the salary cap that last night they actually had to sign a U of T collegiate goalie, Alex Bishop, to an amateur tryout offer. You don't see those that often. It was like an e-bug situation. So, yeah, thankfully Jack Campbell was up to the challenge, and Mr. Bishop got to enjoy the game from the bench, but a little bit of a squeeze. Longer term, we're going to have Michael Hutchinson.
Yeah, and he'll be up on an emergency recall, I believe.
Right.
Right, and I think the rule is you have to essentially play short one day before that becomes available to you. I haven't read up on the specific cap mechanics of it, but I guess the long and short of it is that we with this emergency recall, we now do have the cap room, I suppose.
Yeah, we've gotten him on the roster by hook or by crook anyway, so we'll take it.
Yeah.
There's a longer and better read article on our front page from Katja, as you'd expect, if you'd like to read about it in more detail. But it does raise the question of how many games is Hutchinson going to play, and I don't think the number is 0.
Mm-hmm.
Next weekend, the Leafs have the Sharks on Friday and the Penguins on Saturday. And I don't think the Leafs want to be playing Jack Campbell in back-to-backs in October with the aspirations they have down the road. So I'm going to say at least 1, maybe 2 starts for Hutchinson.
Yeah, it seems that way. Hutchinson is playing the Martin Marincin memorial role of, man, how is this guy still here?
Very much so. Although, you know what? Last year, we said this, and
yes,
we might have been a bit disquieted by the prospect of having to play him again, because the year before he was dreadful. But he was as good as we could have hoped last year, and they won a bunch of games. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I mean, as a third goalie, I think it's very similar to the Marincin thing in that people were, really upset when Marincin played. And it's well, he's a 7th defenseman. Of course he's not that good.
Yeah.
Right? You're using him when things have gone badly. And it's the same with Hutchinson. He's a third goalie. He is fine as a third goalie.
Yeah, exactly. And if he were notably better than a third goalie, he wouldn't clear waivers, which is a part of his job description that's pretty relevant because we send him down to the AHL. Unless you draft a really good goalie, this is kind of what your third goalie is going to look like. It's going to be a Michael Hutchinson caliber-esque player. And if nothing else, he seems like a really nice guy. So let's hope that he can hold the fort for one of those 2 games. I mean, I might play him against the Sharks because I'm it's the Sharks.
Yeah.
Their goaltending might not even be better. So, yeah, we'll see. But
yeah. I mean, on the positive side, Campbell has been very good to start the year. And actually, this can probably lead into what we'll spend the majority of the podcast talking about, which is just our broad impressions from the first 3 games. Mm-hmm. And Campbell's definitely been on the positive side of that ledger.
Yeah, I think undeniably. We all know that Jack Campbell has the talent and the ability to be a very good goalie, and everyone loves him. I wish someone would attach a bungee cord to the waistband of his pants so that he was not allowed to leave the net by any great distance at any time. However, with that caveat, he's been really, really good. And he's
Yeah,
played
I mean,
2.5 games now.
yeah. Saying that, if that Drake Batherson goal against Ottawa just before the end of the second period ended up counting, we would be like, they would be pointing a much bigger spotlight at like Campbell. What the hell are you doing, man?
Yeah, it's that weird thing about goals that get called back is you just sort of memory hold them, but he handled that pretty poorly, as did everyone else. So we're certainly relieved that that went away and the Leafs got the win last night.
Yeah, as we've
yeah.
consistently said, offside reviews are great.
If there's one thing that's important, it's that the game slow up exciting plays and frequently overturn them over trivial differences of a couple of inches several seconds before they happened. So
Yes.
yeah, very good.
If you
Big
don't
fan.
like that, you don't like NHL hockey.
That's what I'm here for. The action, the angles, the Zapruder footage that they apply to the skates. Yeah, so, but Jack Campbell has been good. And my only real question with Campbell at this point is durability. He hasn't played 32 games in an NHL season ever. He was into the 50s between the NHL and the AHL 1 year, a couple years back. But if we turn him into the 1A starter, this is going to be the most taxing NHL season of his career.
Yeah. No, the durability is definitely a concern. I mean, he's been so good with the Leafs that it's easy to forget that, you know, just how good he is also like a concern in the sense that goalies just have these gigantic error bars, and we don't know what Campbell's true level of play is really. Like, it feels like he's been here for a while and he's been good for that entire while, but as you said, it's been spread out over a kind of a long period and not that many games, relatively speaking. So
exactly. Yeah.
You know, every single good game that he has is like a little more evidence. Like, okay, this guy's legit, right? And that's really, really important for us, for obvious reasons, right? I don't need to explain to our brilliant listeners that, you know, goaltending is important. It's, you know, you guys probably come for a bit more detailed analysis than that, but it is.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And no team with notably bad goaltending is going to achieve jack shit. Ask the Philadelphia Flyers, who look like they're just on the way to experiencing that again. But yeah, I mean, we all like Jack Campbell, and I think that with the amount of good play that he's shown us, we all have a growing level of confidence in him. Some people have said, hey, the race is over, he won it, he's our guy, let's ride him, and let's ride him into the playoffs. And I think that's fine too. But it does give me some pause when you look outside the market and there's just not that much level of faith in him. Like, The Athletic did this pretty absurd, but ranking of starting goaltenders, and
it was one of those Custance pieces where he just like talks to people and reports what they write, and like there's nothing you can add to what they write that makes it, that tops it, either as analysis or performance art.
yeah, well, I just wish that they explained why more. And maybe they don't, because there's just nothing behind the curtain on some of these evaluations. But it's often like, yeah, you know, he's been good, but can he, you know, really do an NHL goalie's job? And I'm like, that's what we're asking you. And, you know, like, we're not getting any information here that really counts as analysis. We're just getting you saying, I have some feelings. Anyway, but they put Jack Campbell about 25th on that pretty dubious list among starting goalies. And I'm like, I looked at the list and I was thinking, that seems a bit ungenerous, but like, if the Leafs have the 25th best goaltending in the NHL, that's not going to be great. We're hoping for higher than that. So, yeah, I do think about track record and durability. But that said, with Mrazek out, he's our guy, and we just have to keep hoping he keeps doing what he's been doing.
Yeah, and then hope that Mrazek comes back. And Mrazek didn't look amazing in the, I guess, 2 periods against Ottawa, although, I mean, the Leafs as a whole didn't really look amazing. I'm not really blaming Mrazek specifically.
Even if he hadn't gotten hurt, I'd probably give him a pass on that, just because a couple of those goals were pinballs.
Yeah.
You know, there was the one that was 100% kicked in, by the way. And then there was a double deflection, and then there was like a last-minute buzzer beater. I'm not saying it's great, and over a longer sample, it's like you have to start doing better than whatever that was. But in a couple of minutes, goals like that
it's not like critically worrisome or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Campbell's been good. That's very good. That's probably like if you're evaluating, in the first 3 games, what do we want to see for us to believe that the Leafs are still or not still a contender, have become a contender. I don't think we can ever say still a contender because we haven't done a whole lot of contending.
Yeah.
But yeah, Campbell playing well is a big part of that. Other things on the positive end, William Nylander.
The exceptionally positive end. I don't think there's any doubt he's been our best player.
Yeah.
Our best skater, at least.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and he's been doing it all. We've talked before about how Nylander probably isn't a better player than Mitch Marner because we are obliged to compare them until the heat death of the universe. But Nylander is pretty complete. He can do a lot of things himself. And so even when he's in a situation where, his best line mate is Alex Kerfoot, which is not a feather bed of a situation by any means, he can still look like a very good player. And so, yeah, he's been the best player on the team, and I think he's been the best player on the ice, at least in a couple of those games. And that's impressive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what he's doing is not tremendously easy right now in the sense that he's playing with not great Leafs players for the most part, right? I mean, we like Kerfoot and Bunting. This is our second line. It's not a good second line, right? Or to the extent that it's a good second line, it's entirely because of the efforts of William Nylander.
Right. He's really elevating a couple of guys. Actually, the cliche about elite forwards is, well, can he drive a line? And this is what that looks like. When you're in a situation, there's not much doubt as to who's driving that line. It's him.
Exactly. And they do have the benefit of, teams are matching up more strongly to Tavares and Marner, as they should. But, he's not beating up on fourth lines or anything here. And as we always say, competition is less impactful, generally speaking, than teammates, right? So I think we can kind of take this at face value of like, look, Nylander is really, really helping drive a line right now, which we absolutely need. Because otherwise there is, we can't consistently rely on offense from the third line, and we'll get to them. And they're still on the positive side of things, but we need to be realistic about what they are. And then, you can't say, okay, well, let's count on a goal from Jason Spezza and Wayne Simmons. Right? It happens. It happened last night. It happened actually against Ottawa, too, although Spezza's goal was on the power play. But that's not consistent, necessarily, right? And you can't expect it to be. So, yeah, we need that second line to be something, especially in the absence of Austin Matthews, and Nylander has kind of willed it into existence at this point. And he's just been on it in every way, right? His play with the puck has been as good as ever. And I think there's a part of him that, I mean, this is similar to what we said and what you were alluding to with him being kind of so good at so many things offensively. There's a part of him where I think he really benefits from not having to even think about deferring to people. I'm just like, okay, remember when he was drafted, his Twitter bio was "Give me the puck," which is just that. First off, number one, that's some king shit right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, but number two, it's on this line, the plan is give me the puck, give Nylander the puck, and he will do something with it. And he has that confidence right now, and he has the skills to back it up. The other thing that's been impressive, and he's always been good at this in the offensive zone. So I'll mention that first. The other thing that's been impressive is his tenacity to get the puck back. So he's created a lot of offensive zone turnovers, and I've said this many times before, offensive zone turnovers are the best playmaker in the world, right? Because it catches opponents unaware, they're out of position, they have to go from forwards to backwards, it takes time. That's what you want to create. And against good teams, that's hard to create, but Nylander is very good at that, as are Matthews and Marner, by the way. And that's exactly how the Kerfoot goal was scored, right? Forecheck, where we won the puck battle. I think Bunting and Nylander won the puck battle. Nylander steps away with the puck, makes a great pass to Kerfoot. Easy goal, right? And when you don't have players playing with you who can, systematically break down set defenses, you have to take advantage of those low-hanging fruit. Nylander's done so thus far.
Yeah. So I mean, really all to the good. Now, he'll have ups and downs throughout the season,
Yes.
as everyone does, but Nylander was very good in the playoffs against Montreal. He's been good to start this season, and I think there's certainly some hope that he's sort of reached his mature form now where we can count on him to be a first-line caliber player. And if so, that's the strength of this team. as we've said time and again, is a lead offense. And so as particularly John Tavares gets older, we may need that more and more for the strength to be coming from the right wing on that line.
Yes, and I guess the other good thing is he's been playing a lot at 5-on-5 and playing a lot generally, at least in the first two games. He is playing a bit on the penalty kill now, which is, I mean, I don't think he's moving the needle a whole lot there, right? Maybe we'll see him grow into it more, and I can see the idea because he can be, you know, a puck thief, and certainly if he gets the puck at any point, he has the confidence to just play keep away with it and kill 25 seconds. So that's productive. But yeah, yesterday in the second game against Ottawa, he didn't play nearly as much, and I guess that's like a mild concern. And I hope the first two games are really what sticks. Because certainly without Austin Matthews, like the list of real players the Leafs have is much smaller. And we need to use the fact that we have a real player in William Nylander.
Absolutely. The thing about the penalty killing, that feels to me more like a didactic thing. Like, this is Keefe trying to teach Nylander to do things well defensively, or to reward commitment and be like, see, you're a well-rounded player now, and all this sort of stuff. In terms of when the time comes in the playoffs, do I want William Nylander to be playing a bunch of PK minutes? Probably not. I don't think that's what he's for, and I don't think that the team is deep enough that it can be shunting 5v5 minutes away from William Nylander. He should be playing a lot, as we've said. It should be on the power play and at 5-on-5. And we have other people to do the penalty killing thing. That said, you know, maybe this will be good for him. I do think that just in general, the stars on the PK thing is fun. And I don't hate it. And it's always great when someone runs off for a shorthanded goal. But I think that as much as anything, it's almost an outgrowth of the hockey morality play thing, where, like, to be really good, you have to learn to do all of the jobs. And, you know, that's great. But some people are just really good at different jobs. Yeah. And that's fine, too. But anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that means so yesterday, Nylander played the fourth least of any forward at 5-on-5. Right? And it's like, okay, I look, there's arguments to it. There were some special teams, although there was less special teams in this game than there was in the first Ottawa game. I'm pretty sure, like, there was more 5v5 time. We were leading for a lot of it, so it's like, okay, maybe you want to preferentially play the third line a bit more. Nylander didn't have amazing on ice stats in last night's game. Like, it trailed his line mates. Although I think from watching it, that seemed more like he was doing the right things, and for whatever reason, like, the puck was, you know, bouncing off people's stick. Maybe a defenseman would pass out of the zone for no reason. Like, I didn't think that had much to do with Nylander specifically as much as it did just, you know, kind of idiosyncratic variance. But still, you know, even with all of that, it is just a little bit weird where it's like, man, do I really want David Kampf playing 90 seconds more at 5-on-5 than William Nylander? Do I really want Pierre Engvall playing half a minute more than William Nylander? And, like, again, that third line was good, but just in a general sense, is that what we want?
And the thing that I think draws more attention to it is that the Saturday game was at home. Keefe had the last change. He can chase mashups more easily. Whereas Thursday was on the road in Ottawa. To some extent, he has to accept what the other coach is going to do unless he's willing to make aggressive changes on the fly to follow it up. I think Sheldon Keefe has wanted to shut down line, and this will segue, for a very long time. I think he's got the outlines of one in the very early going. And Katja keeps saying, okay, I want to see this third line play against, like, a real top line or against, like, a really good team with offensive stars, which Ottawa doesn't have and Montreal has to a limited extent. And that's fair. So a bit TBD on that. But I think that Sheldon Keefe believes he's got the answer. He's got at least the best answer he's had access to in some time. And so he's really keen to play this shutdowny third line, and that's great. But letting the other side dictate matchups to a great extent, to the point where you stop playing what looks to be your best forward on the ice right now, I don't love that. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that worries me in a playoff game.
There's definitely some galaxy brain potential here.
Yeah.
And again, this has nothing to do with our opinions of the third line, which they've been really good. I think we were a little bit negative on conference, like okay, we just signed the shutdown guy on the worst defense in the league, and we're expecting that to be the core of a shutdown line. And I don't think, I mean I don't think we were unfair about it, to the sense that we said he's not useless, but we were a little worried that, like, okay, is he going to be up to the task on a real third line? We still don't know the answer, because again, Ottawa and Montreal are not incredibly strong offensive teams.
Mm-hmm.
But if this was like a necessary, this is like the last 3 games have been like a necessary test. Like if they had failed against Ottawa and Montreal, then there's no hope against Tampa, against Boston, against Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been good to see this third line of Kampf, Kasha, and Engvall have some defensive utility. Like they're not getting sheltered. Certainly in terms of zone usage, they have very, very extreme defensive zone usage. And in terms of competition, they're not like getting hard matched to top lines, because that would be very dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And that would lead to the Galaxy braining of, okay, now we're playing Jay McClement 20 minutes a game.
Yeah.
But they're not, like they are playing kind of a bit above their station, so to speak, at least in some situations, and that's also good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I am pretty inclined to believe they have the defensive chops to do that. But when we signed David Comp, one of the things we talked about is, if he's your third line center, you have a third line that is not going to score very much. And
Yes.
that's a problem, because people need to put pucks in the net to some extent. Conf and Kasha have 0 points as yet in the regular season. That's also not incidental. I don't want to overfixate on points in 3 games. I'm just saying nothing they've done in these 3 games really allays my concern that this line won't score enough, despite
Right.
Kasha, I think, doing his damnedest to drive some offense.
Yeah, he had like 10 shots in the first game. He was really, going for it. And I mean, Engvall had a really good first game, and then I always love it when this happens, where like some depth player has a really good start to the year, or just even one really good game, and everyone's like, oh well, maybe he can turn the corner, and then there's usually a crash back to reality. It doesn't usually happen in the very next game.
That was
And then
immediate.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made this absolutely brain dead. Breakout pass is the wrong word. It didn't go out. And I don't know how it could have aspired to be a breakout pass, but it was like horizontal from just inside his own blue line to just inside the blue line on the other side, where nobody was except an Ottawa Senator, who came in and was like, okay, and went and scored. And I think everyone big mistakes goals in hockey, right? It's often there's a turnover, there's something that happens, someone's a little out of position, we always break it down. And the truth is, on a lot of goals, it takes a village. A lot of people had to miss a little thing or not make the best play. That was just 100% on Pierre Engvall, pretty well. I think that was his fault. So, Anyway, after that terrific game that he had beforehand, so let's hope for more of the former and less of the latter.
But yeah, I mean, it is still a concern that the third line doesn't have much offense, and I know it could be allayed somewhat. It's like, okay, maybe the fourth line has a bit more offense than the average fourth line. But yeah, I mean, there's in the first game, in the first and third games at least have played, they didn't trail for very long, right? Montreal, they trailed briefly and then it was tied for a large portion. Tony Nander scored the winning goal. Yesterday, the Leafs were ahead basically the entire game. And in that situation, you can see yourself being like, yeah, okay, we have this shut down third line. Nothing's going to happen there, and that's fine. When you're behind, as we were against Ottawa in Ottawa, it suddenly becomes like a little bit depressing when you see that shutdown line get over the board. It's like, okay, fuck, well, this is 45 seconds that is just going to go by, and nothing's going to happen to get us back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's just the reality. And what I don't want to happen is for us to get into a situation where we get leads and then start playing the shutdown line more than whatever line William Nylander is on.
Yeah, I keep thinking, this all trends in the direction of, okay, we'll be positioned to sit on leads in a way that I just do not believe this team should, frankly, even attempt.
Yes.
They don't have it in them. I don't
No.
think so. They can be better. And it can still be worthwhile to have this good defensive third line. I'm just like, if this team is going to nurse a 2-0 advantage all the way home, like the way the New York Islanders can do, or the peak Columbus Blue Jackets did, I just don't think this horse is meant to run that race. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
I agree. So I've been positive about the third line, and I've been positive about time on ice allocations in the first two games. The last game just gave me a tiny bit of pause of like, okay, what's it going to look like in games where we get a lead? And I mean, spoiler alert, the Leafs, and this is our general opinion, the Leafs are a good team,
Yeah.
right? We hope to be playing with a lead fairly significant portion of the time. So, our time on ice allocation with a lead is definitely a thing we need to consider. And if that's going to be a situation where we're going to routinely overplay this third line, that can be a concern. But this is something to evaluate going forward. It's not something where I'm ringing the alarm bells now. It's just something to monitor.
Yeah. All
And
that said, yeah. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
there are worse problems in the sense that, okay, at least in those situations, A, we'll have a lead, and B, this third line appears to be somewhat useful right now. And when Matthews comes back, presumably Kerfoot gets bumped down to this line, or maybe he gets bumped down to the fourth line somehow in this weird... That's another roster decision that we'll have to discuss at some point, but it's possible that this line gets strengthened in some way.
Yeah, and so we'll wait and see on that one. In the short term, the encouraging things are Kasha looks about as good as I could have hoped. Kampf looks like the best version of himself
Yeah,
as a
also
very
about
good
as good as we
defensive.
could have hoped, but like
Yeah.
our hopes were not that high. Like, again,
Yeah.
I've had some people talk to me and say, I think, Kampf can get 30 points this year. And I think Kampf can get 30 points over the course of his contract with the Leafs. I don't think he's getting 30 points this year.
I would be very surprised.
Right?
And in fairness, he can be successful without hitting 30 points. It's just that's what we're dealing with now. We're getting a guy who does not score very much.
Yes.
If he has 30 points and he's great defensively, he's filled a no.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
yeah.
Right? And again, it's super, super important for the Leafs' top two lines to basically always be humming as a result. Because just the other offense is idiosyncratic. The Leafs don't have great offensive producers from the back end. I know, like, Morgan Rielly's obviously a very great offensive defenseman, but his offensive chops are more collaborative, and which, by the way, is a feature to me, not a bug, right? Like, I don't want... I think offensive defensemen can sometimes be cannibalizing. That's definitely not the case with Rielly. It's not the case with Sandin, right? But it also means that you don't get, like, easy offense, like, low-hanging fruit offense that takes you to like some base level of floor raising with them that you do with, like, say, Shea Weber.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that ties in actually to something else that we've noticed, just as an aside. The Leafs seem to be shooting for high tips a little bit more often this year, prominently Rielly and Sandin. Sandin appears to be quite good at it to me. And
It does seem like Sandin's able to get the pucks through relatively well.
And I've talked about this actually with my dad. He thinks, the problem, or one of the problems he says with the Leafs power play, is they don't have a big shooting threat at the point. Shea Weber would be the archetypal example of what that looks like. And I'm thinking, well, one, for the reasons we just discussed, I'm not huge on defensemen taking a lot of shots, because even good defensemen shooting a lot are generally not as good forwards shooting a lot. But if we can get those kind of floating wristers that are still a threat because they might be tipped, and they can be tipped by players like, say, Nick Ritchie, Michael Bunting, John Tavares most prominently, or Mitch Marner in the bumper role with a high tip. That's good. I think that's enough to make that a real threat back there, and it's something the defenses have to account for, despite not being a big cannon.
Yeah, it is a bit of a I mean, it's 3 games, so it's very hard to really, judge things concretely right now. But certainly, under Keefe, the Leafs have not really been a point shot heavy team at all. If you look at their shot plots on HockeyViz or something like that, we seem to really avoid those areas. And like the top end of the zone is for people to kind of cycle around and then walk the line and look for passing options to probe. Right, and then like the last case is, okay, float it in through or try and get it on net and see what happens. This year, there seems to, relatively speaking, more of our shots are just more of the plays from the point are actually just shots, right? Now under Babcock, this was not uncommon as well. Although again, it was more focused on high to low offensive plays, right? So like getting the puck back to the point, and then more often than under Keefe, getting it on than Keefe until this year at least, getting it on net somehow, or using that as a means to get the puck back in deep. So I wonder if we're reverting to those offensive patterns again. The high to low play is not typically considered a very high value play, but it's very available, right? I mean, there's this temptation, especially among hockey stats people, to be like, it's a bit like, well, why don't they make the whole plane out of the black box, right? Or like, why don't we just only use cross ice passes and from behind the net and things like that? And that's because defense is geared to take that stuff away by default, and if you don't show any ability to deviate from that, they take it away even further, right? Because defenses are not static; they're dynamic. This is, it's a competitive optimization, right? You're optimizing your own offense, and the defense is reacting to how you're playing and trying to take away what you're good at. So, as a result, the high to low is always there, because that's where defenses want to give up space, because it's the least dangerous spot of the offensive zone. And I guess we'll see going into the future what the patterns look like from that position, because it has been a bit more shot heavy on this year than it has been in previous years under Keefe, at least to my eye.
I do think that against Montreal, and this was really noticeable in Game 7, when things really went to hell, the Leafs did not get shots from the slot at all.
Like that Montreal was the same against Columbus the year before.
Yeah, Montreal built a barricade around the most dangerous area of the ice, and the Leafs just didn't crack it. And so a play like this, which can originate and get a redirection before it even gets to that level, is one effort, I think, to work around that obstacle, and then at least maybe you create some chaos in front of the net. You start generating some chances just on the madness that ensues, and, at least theoretically, you have guys like Nick Ritchie and Michael Bunting who can maybe swoop in and take advantage of the opportunities you thereby generate. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think that's the idea.
No, it's very much not perfect for the reasons that we discussed. Like these are low probability plays generally. Right? So, but it's, I guess, maybe a cross-sport analog would be, it's not dissimilar to kind of isolation scoring in basketball, where it's not always the highest points per possession, but you can almost always get into that action without the defense blowing it up. And when defenses are really locked in, and when you're facing really good defenses, there's immense value in just being able to create a shot from nothing. Similarly, I wonder if the Leafs are trying to focus more on this in the sense of being able to take this relatively undangerous situation and find ways to make it relatively more dangerous, and to utilize the skills they have to do so. We don't know. This is all conjecture.
Right.
But it's worth considering, right? There's I think actually Ottawa's a good example of this, because they're not a good team, but I think one thing they do genuinely fairly well is they cut off the easy sources of offense pretty reasonably. I think my opinion is in the NHL there's two broad classes of easy offense. There's rush offense, which usually comes off of someone making a mistake, like in the offensive zone or the neutral zone, right? Or a lack of balance in a team's offensive zone structure, or a fortune bounce. But usually it's a little idiosyncratic. You can have players who can take advantage of it, right? I mean, if you have Matt Barzal, for example, you're going to be a much better rush team than if you don't, because he's so good with the puck and he's so good in the neutral zone. But to some extent, the great teams don't make those types of mistakes very often. They don't make terrible pinches regularly, right? They don't shoot into shin pads and cause breaks the other way. They don't overskate the puck in the neutral zone. They play above the puck. So that source of offense is, you want to be able to take advantage of it when it's there, but it's also to some extent very dependent on your opponent giving it to you, at least to some degree, right? You can force it, but again, some teams are more resistant to that pressure than others. And then the other source of easy offense is the offensive zone turnovers, which I think almost every team is to some sense susceptible to. Obviously, some are better than others. If you have Victor Hedman, if you have Adam Fox, they're much better dealing with pressure than Roman Polak.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to create those levels of offense, but in some cases it's not going to be available, and you're going to have to make do with the fact that, okay, you may have the puck in a set situation where you're all on the outside and your opponents are in their zone, in their box, and how do you break them down in this way?
Exactly. I think a lot of the struggle with the Leafs has been we have such a great first trick. We have this great shooting or a cross ice Marner to Matthews or what have you. We have these go-tos that are awesome. What do we do when those aren't working? And I think the answer, what do we do when those aren't working, has been a lot less impressive than the first couple things that we have going for us.
Right. And it's not that, like, we're not saying, oh, the Leafs are a bad offensive team. It's just that, or that, like, the Leafs couldn't have won series with the offensive structure they had before, or with the offensive structure they have now. It's just, as we've discussed against Columbus and against Montreal, they arguably did enough to win, but it wasn't quite enough. And all you can do is, like, try and inure yourself to the bounces as much as possible.
Right.
Right? And all we're kind of espousing here is the idea of, like, can you do something on the margins to make it a little less likely that a team can shut you out? That a team can, like, shut down your that when they shut down your first choice offense, you still have something that can maybe give you the offense you need to just scrape by. Because, like, yeah, I'm not saying the Leafs should definitely not rebuild their offense around point shots, right, or point shots and high tips and things like that. But yeah, it's like sometimes you have to practice and perfect and improve the areas where you can at least get in. Like, it's an unsexy way to generate offense, but you can get into that at any time. And if you could make that a little bit more effective, maybe that gives you the marginal goal you need. And we didn't have the marginal goals we needed last year by definition.
Yeah, but I mean that's all it is. Like, how many playoff series swing on one or two goals? Last year was such an obvious example because quite literally one goal at any of several moments would have swung it. But yeah, that's absolutely something that we want to have, is some secondary option, something to turn to when things get difficult.
Yes. So that was a very significant aside, because the next thing on our list was to talk about was Michael Bunting.
Yeah, he's fun. I like Michael Bunting.
Yes, yeah, he's been enjoyable. I think there's already some calls for him to replace Nick Ritchie on the top line, and I mean, we have to caveat this by saying that Bunting is facing easier competition than Ritchie is right now, which is particularly important because the type of offense that Bunting provides, I think, is hurt in some way, like more significantly against top competition, right? Because you have suddenly just much better defensemen who are better at clearing the front of the net and not going to take as many penalties and things like that. So it's not clear that he would, necessarily translate this exact level of effectiveness back to the top line. But alongside that, we have to recognize that he's also playing with not Mitch Marner and Tavares.
The idea of Michael Bunting is exactly what I want.
Yes.
With Matthews and Marner. The idea of Michael Bunting is this tough, persistent, belligerent, kind of sandpapery, offensive opportunist who's going to swarm around the net, piss everybody right the fuck off, and then catch the puck when it comes to him and fire it off. And he's already done that for a goal. He didn't have to catch it. He had to make a little play before he fired it off. But still,
yeah,
he's shown enough that you can really hope for it.
He does seem to provide a bit more away from the crease than Nick Ritchie has, right?
Yeah.
At least thus far. And he hasn't been great at that. I mean, there's definitely been plays where I've been frustrated because, for example, Nylander will make a nice pass and the play would progress and then it'll die on either Bunting or Kerfoot's stick. And that's just because they're not elite offensive players, right? So that's going to happen, relatively more than it happens than if that was Mitch Marner instead, right? Because that's what good offensive players do. They prolong offensive situations, even in scenarios where lesser players would have given it up. But Bunting, for what we're paying him for, and for his pedigree, has been, I think, good so far. He had a strong game yesterday. I do like that he draws penalties seemingly every game. I assume that's going to dry up at some point, but it's nice. and he's an easy guy to root for.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just brings a lot to the team in terms of all those ineffable qualities that we admire. Also, I just feel like I want to clarify when we talk about all these depth players, we can either seem like we're sort of talking about them as if they're big, serious top six woo players, or kind of discount them. This is like the low mediocre range of the NHL in terms of forwards, and we've just got a whole lot of guys from that pile that we're trying to rank and sort out, okay, what's the best of these options? And so Michael Bunting does not have to be as good as Zach Hyman. He won't be, but I think at least in the early going, he's at least raised the possibility that he might be the right option in the top six.
Yeah.
Very much subject to change.
Yes, and I mean, I think Keefe will be flexible and move things around a little bit at some point. I'm not saying we'll talk about Richie. Actually, we can talk about Richie next, because the next thing on our list is like who hasn't looked as good. So this would be a good transition. Like, I don't think Richie has looked good at all. I also, and I am biased against him in a sense where like, he's just not really the type of player I enjoy watching generally, because he is very useless outside of the crease. And he has a penchant for taking just awful cross-checking penalties, like last night. But I'm also not saying let's write him off after 3 games. I'm willing to give him a little bit more time.
Right.
Especially
he hasn't impressed.
Yeah, he hasn't. Yeah. But that line could have done, like that. If that line has, if one of their shots, that Marner or Tavares has created goes in, and Richie picks up a cheapy assist on, or do we think more positively of him in that sense? Probably, right? So I don't want to over centralize on that just yet. But yeah, he doesn't have an infinite leash on that spot right now, and I think Bunting is catching up to him and making a case for at least trying him out in a higher role.
I'd agree with that. The thing about Nick Ritchie, as you've said, is he has very pronounced strengths and weaknesses. Strengths are he is big, he can go to the high action areas of the ice, he can get a stick on some pucks, and he'll score some goals. The downside is everything else. So
yeah.
That's a bit unfair, but it's when that first thing isn't working, when he's not producing, you're not remembering some tip that he just knocked in. He gets frustrating in a hurry because his weaknesses are thrown into sharp relief. But, in that preseason game a couple weeks ago, he had 2 dynamite tips. It was against very soft competition. But if he gets one of those next game, people will be saying, see, that's why you get Nick Ritchie.
Yeah. And so. I think, again, it's 3 games, and there's a bit of an unfair comparison here because Richie will sometimes get taken off that line for Nylander after like TV timeouts or in offensive zone starts. But Richie, Tavares, Marner has not had good numbers overall. And to the extent that they've looked good, I think they did look good as a group in the latter half of the second game against Ottawa. It has very clearly been Marner and Tavares, and like Richie is just like, also featuring.
Yeah.
And as you would expect, the times when Tavares play and Marner play with Nylander, it's just like unequivocally way better.
Yeah.
Now again, that's bias sample because those are offensive zone shifts almost always, and Nylander, like we're not expecting Richie to be William Nylander.
Yeah.
Right. But
it would be really foolish to look at both Richie and Nylander and say that you would prefer Nick Ritchie. I can't imagine that anyone would ever have done that at any point since 2014.
No,
sure. When would that have come up?
Yeah.
But look, he hasn't had a good couple of games. I think he can be better than this. I think that also we are swayed the way that everyone is to some extent by the fact that when pucks are going in, you look better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Richie is more subject to that than most. So.
Yep. I agree with that completely. So yeah, he's kind of on thin ice a little bit. Like the thing, if we had more options, I know we said we have a million options for that, but like,
they're not good options.
They're not, no, because it's like okay, you have Bunting and Richie, and it's like okay, well, Ilya Mikheyev. I mean, even putting aside his injury,
yeah.
Do I want him there? Not really. You can say do you put Nylander on the left and then pair Kasha with, a Nylander led, like a Nylander based line with Kasha on the right, and then you can put like Bunting say up top, but like even then you're still just all you've done is you've cobbled together a way to remove one of Bunting or Richie from these top lines. But the reality is we have to rely on these guys,
Yeah, this is
right?
who we got.
And
So,
Bunting has been good so far. Richie has not. So it's going to be interesting to see. The one thing we didn't, so we've talked about them like a little bit obliquely, but the other thing we have to mention, and I think on the good side, and in your notes, Fulman, you said that like this might start some fights. Mitch Marner.
I think Mitch Marner has played pretty well. I don't think he's been perfect. He's had some quiet periods, but it's also like, forgive me, how many seasons of Mitch Marner are we at now? This is the 6th one in the NHL. And this is kind of what it's like. He's an exceptional perimeter player. He is very, very good around the edges of the play. And if he can make plays that go towards the center of the ice, he'll pick up assists. He'll spark plug offense. He'll do all sorts of great things. The puck hasn't gone in quite as much lately, and so he's sitting with 1 assist. And I think everyone is just very, very mad at him over the playoffs, which is clouding how he's looked. But I think he's played fine.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the offense actually isn't what's concerning me right now. It's the defensive numbers for that line have been poor. And again, it's 3 games, so it's you don't want to over centralize on those numbers versus how they look. But yeah, like I think that's been a little concerning and more concerning to me because I don't have any doubt that the offense for Mitch Marner is there. Right? Yeah, the offense is going to be fine. He's going to have flaws, and maybe those flaws are more kind of more centralized or more obvious in the playoffs. I'm not entirely convinced of that, but I accept it's certainly a possibility. But the offense is just not what concerns me. Right? Against Ottawa last night, Marner was all over the place in a positive sense. He was really creating great offense. If Anton Forsberg doesn't make a candidate for the save of the year, robbing Jean Tavares in tight after a great pass by Marner, we're not having this conversation. We're saying Mitch Marner looks like Mitch Marner and John Tavares looks like John Tavares.
Yeah.
So offensively, they're fine. I think at earlier parts, at various points, they weren't always generating strong offense in the first 3 games, and I would like them to be better in more consistently putting pressure on the defense in those important areas of the ice, but I'm not concerned about them generally because the overall offensive production has been fine. It's the defense that's been a little worrisome. I don't know if that's them or if if it's been on the Leafs defensemen as a whole. In general, I actually think the Leafs quietly over the first 3 games, facing not great offensive teams, we haven't had good defensive results. That's probably the biggest concern you would have to have about the Leafs at this point.
Right. And what stood out to me was that the Muzzin Hall pairing did not look good to me in the first 2 games. And then Hall was sick game 3, Muzzin Hall better.
Yeah, this is kind of what I was alluding to, right? With Marner and Tavares having bad defensive results. Is it because of them, or is it because they spend a decent amount of time with Muzzin Hall, and Muzzin Hall just looked really bad to start the year in the first 2 games. As you said, Muzzin was much better yesterday. But yeah, like it's we need them to be good. We need Muzzin in particular to really elevate Justin Hall.
Yeah, and this is the sort of painful part of the conversation because you think, gee, why would Jake Muzzin not look as good? Well, it could be early season rust. It's a tiny sample. There are lots of reasons to hand-wave that away. He is also 32. He's had injuries the last few years. He's not a fleet-of-foot player to begin with. It's not that hard to see, like, the beginnings of a decline in Jake Muzzin's game. As at least being a possibility. I'm not saying it's happening. I'm just saying that's a thing that is a big worry for me. Because I would say, since he's gotten here, Jake Muzzin has probably been the Leafs' best all-around defenseman.
Certainly the best at 5-on-5.
Yeah,
like,
it's hard to weigh his comparisons against Riley on the power play. But,
yeah.
With the power play going completely to hell last year, that plays a role. So yeah, I think we rely on Jake Muzzin, and the reason that the Leafs defense has been sneakily pretty competent the last season plus is on him to a large measure. And then TJ Brody, who I think has looked fine. Yeah, so all we can do is hope that works itself out. There's not a plan B for Jake Muzzin gets old in a hurry. I'm not saying that he is. I'm saying I hope that he's not, because we need him.
Right.
Justin Holl, I think a lot of people are going to keep harkening back to the expansion draft and thinking we should have kept Jared McCann, and maybe, I don't know. But I think Holl is going to ebb and flow. I don't think he'll look as bad as he did the first couple of games. So,
yeah, with Muzzin, I guess the thing that gives me a bit of hope is that the issues that we've seen them have been more along the lines of, it hasn't been like, okay, he's just getting beat to spots and he's no longer able to make plays on the puck. It seemed just more idiosyncratic and more that, bobbling the puck and, pucks hopping over sticks or an errant pass here and there. Things that I could more easily explain with Russ, and maybe this is just me trying to get high on copium. Because we cannot survive we cannot survive Jake Muzzin being any less than the Jake Muzzin he's been the past few years.
yeah.
Right. And again, I guess this is another important thing to remember. When we talk about the Leafs, like we've said, the Leafs is a good team, right? We know this is a good team. Our bar is, can we win rounds? Right? Yeah. We can make the playoffs with Jake Muzzin taking a step back. We can make the playoffs with Justin Holl taking a step back. It won't be easy because the Atlantic is tough. But can we win rounds with them taking a step back? No, we cannot.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's just to keep in mind, that's the bar we're dealing with here. Like we're setting the bar high, but I think the Leafs would want the bar to be set high. And I think, if when Kyle Dubas listens to this podcast, he would agree with our very reasonable, expectations. Yeah. And for judging the Leafs relative to the goal of, are these guys looking the way we would want a contender to look?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of results, you can say, look, they got 4 points in 3 games. That's enough to cruise to a high seed. Yes. That's fine.
Results-wise, it's fine. And again, we're doing this all without our best player and maybe the second or third best player in the league.
Yeah. And so that makes a huge difference. But it's something to keep in mind. If there's a real concern for me, it's actually that. The rest of this stuff, I think, is pretty manageable. Mm-hmm. It's within the realm of stuff that just happens. So let's hope that Jake Muzzin settles in. Yes. We wanted to talk a bit about Timothy Liljegren, who's only been in 1 game, but is a topic of much discussion. He was a first-round pick in 2017, has hung around the fringes of the NHL at times, has gotten into a few games here and there with not a ton of success the last couple seasons. And so he's still trying to make the jump from good in the AHL to a real boy in the NHL. I think people seemed to like him last night more than I did. I didn't think he was awful, but I sometimes wonder if people are kind of hoping and seeing what they hope to see.
Yeah, I think so. I don't always agree with Katya's evaluations of players, but I do genuinely quite agree with her take on Liljegren, which is that people are big successing him, the opposite of big mistaking. I thought that was a very clever phrase from her. I think there's a lot of times we look at, he'll do something nice and it's like, oh, nice, that was a good play. And then you look at his stats, they weren't that great, generally speaking. Last night, they were much worse than Jake Muzzin's, on the whole. I guess Muzzin got paired with Sandin at some points, I think probably after a power play or probably, some mixed shift, and that juiced his numbers further. But yeah, I mean, Liljegren just didn't look like he was processing the game at the speed you need to in order to really succeed in the NHL, and I'm a little worried about his ability to do so. He did have a very ugly play where he bobbled the puck on a after receiving it just outside his own blue line, and it led to a decent chance against for Ottawa. In his defense, Wayne Simmons gave him a truly awful pass, which I know players need to be able to handle suboptimal passes, but this was in his feet. And quite awkward. So I'm not trying to over-centralize on that one play because that stuff happens. But just throughout the game, Liljegren just didn't look amazing to me.
Yeah, and hey, it's one game. We'll see what he can do. Justin Hall is apparently suffering from some non-COVID illness, so I don't know how long he's going to be away. Presumably not very. And then we'll see if Liljegren gets into more games. I'm hoping to see more from him.
Yes, I want to see an extended run of him, because it takes time to get comfortable in the NHL. His track record in the NHL is not good so far, but we'll see. I definitely agree with what a lot of different people have said, that strip away what you want Liljegren to be and look at what he's done. And if this was a guy in another team, we'd just be like, it just seems like just a guy.
Exactly. And there's a lot of held over magic from first round pick. It takes a long time to dissipate in the minds. And also, people view him as taking the job away from Justin Hall, who has a wildly fluctuating popularity in Toronto at any given time, it feels like. But they think, okay, look, Hall is mostly being carried by Jake Muzzin, which may be true. Liljegren can probably do that at least. And I'm like, maybe he can't, though. I don't think that Justin Hall is actually the power of the pairing or anything like that, but I also don't think he's a total just warm body.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Still though, more good than bad in the first few games considering the circumstances. It wasn't dazzling. It's not going to cleanse the pain of the first round loss to Montreal. But if you told me the Leafs are going to play 3 games without Austin Matthews to start the season, and we win 2 of them, I'd take it. So,
agreed. And hopefully Matthews can start playing Monday. That would be ideal.
Yes. Obviously they shouldn't rush him because he is, he's too central. They are quite right to be very conservative with his recovery, in general and for long-term reasons. But we'd certainly love to have him back. So.
Oh, as a side note, did you read that ESPN feature on Matthews?
I skimmed it. Okay. It was a bit heavy.
Well, yeah, and it's for hardcore Leafs fans. It's the same. It's a lot of the same anecdote. It's the very generic Austin Matthews feature. It's he grew up playing in Arizona on small ice, which has helped him in tight spaces. He connected with the Ukrainian coach, who has helped develop him. He really likes fashion. So it's all stuff we knew.
Yeah.
I sent it to a friend of mine who's just getting into hockey here, and she said that her impression was that Matthews seems to want to be more interesting as a person than he is, which is
Jesus, that's ruthless.
Which is very cutting, but also seems incredibly accurate.
I mean, I've seen the man's outfits, so I can't rule that out. Wow, that's savage. We might have to close down the podcast after your friend just disemboweled our best player.
So, anyways, I thought that was just funny.
Yeah. Anyway, on the ice, at least, he's very interesting, and we'll trust to. It has a case for other people how interesting he is off it, but that's funny.
Right.
We wanted to talk just about a general thing, in the final segment of our podcast. And
yes, this is normally where we talk about bad takes, but we're expanding our scope here. We're not talking about normally bad takes is very centralized on a person or a set of people who have said something dumb on the internet, and generally a media person. And instead, we're just taking aim at media as a whole right now, or sports media specifically. I guess this isn't a new criticism or a novel criticism by us. Other people have remarked on this with more, with more depth and more rigor. But I guess what we wanted to discuss was access reporting in sports media. So, yeah, that's the preface. Floodman, take it away.
So this actually stems from basketball as the immediate sparking of the discussion. Kyrie Irving, who is a eccentric star player for the Brooklyn Nets of the NBA, has been pretty absolute about not getting vaccinated, even though it's going to require him to miss. Well, it would require significant numbers of games. It looks like he's not going to play at all until that issue is resolved. And so he gave a quasi-interview story to The Athletic. It was actually mostly sourced from friends of Kyrie, was the angle on it, by Shams Charania. And it really...
friends named Irie Curving.
I probably should have been like, oh yeah, but it wasn't okay, but it was him. So anyway, at least I suspect he had a strong influence over it, and it cast his anti-vax attitudes as being sort of vaguely heroic and sort of a respectable struggle for, I guess, the rights of the voiceless and stuff like that. And it was an exceptionally generous reading of what's a pretty selfish and stupid decision. And so
Yes.
you wonder, how does an article like this come to be? Well, when you're an insider in any sport, and this is where the relevance to hockey comes in, you cultivate sources. If you're an insider, you have people that you talk to, and they tell you things, and that influences your reporting. And to some extent, they're getting benefits out of the relationship by getting information passed out to the public through you. They're saying things to you that they want heard widely. Spread the word. And so the result is inevitably that they will try to angle your reporting in their benefit. And being a journalist is about managing that relationship in a way where you get useful info out of it, but you don't totally sell out your actual credibility as a journalist
Right.
to just be a stenographer for whatever they want you to say.
You don't uncritically repeat ideas or arguments that are, I guess, in this case especially, not only, erroneous and irresponsible, but factually incorrect, it potentially harmful to society as a whole. Right? Like
Yeah.
there has to be some, if people make fun of journalists and the media for having an inflated sense of self-worth at times. But the reality is, being a journalist is a real job that is difficult and requires, very delicate management of these sorts of things. That requires a lot of critical thought. It requires the ability to be able to understand the perspective of your source and present the information in such a way that, it's the information is conveyed responsibly, but also not as your own view or not as an objective truth, as opposed to the perspective of a single person, which may or may not be correct, right? And it's not easy to do. But what's happening now is it's just a lot of these journalists, these sports journalists in particular, are glorified iPhone notes voice memos.
Right. And so sports is always treated as kind of a joke, not subject to the same rigorous standards, maybe, as other reporting. The line is, it's the toy department of journalism. And so people sometimes say, hey, why are you taking it so seriously? It's just about sports. Who cares? Why, what's wrong with some access merchant reporting where, yeah, you favor your sources to some extent? Well, when you get to a serious issue like this, like vaccines, or like what's going on with the Chicago Blackhawks, or like
What's
100
happening
other
with Washington football team?
yeah, or like 100 stories that are significant, that are sports stories, but that have a greater importance. Suddenly you have a lot of people who have spent most of their careers, who have gotten much of their careers, by being in bed with management sources, or people on the inside of a team who have a line. And so when that line is bad or irresponsible, when they're just spouting bullshit, suddenly you don't have journalists with the independence to say, hey, wait a minute, no, that's nonsense, and to call them out on it. And that actually does start mattering after a while. In a trivial sense, you see it all the time with, say, the Edmonton Oilers media, who have been almost openly in management's pocket at every turn. And it was most glaring in the Chiarelli era, because the team would do the most absolutely brain-dead things you can imagine. And as long as it was remotely possible, guys like Mark Spector or Terry Jones would be like, it's shaping up pretty well. We think it's actually going just great. And I think that was a reflection of their sourcing, of who they talked to in the organization. So even it affects the day-to-day analysis of the sport. But when you get to serious issues,
Right. Yeah, and
it's a real problem.
yeah, and it's fun to make fun of people like Spectre or whatever local beat writer is carrying water for the team. As you said, that's trivial, but sports, despite being, I guess, in some sense, a very trivial exercise, are a real industry with billions of dollars, with very powerful people who can, have huge impacts on the people around them and the world. Right? So, yeah, there are situations that arise from sports that are really important. This stuff with Kyrie Irving and kind of painting his refusal to get the vaccine as some sort of being a voice for the voiceless is incredibly irresponsible, especially considering the very pronounced racial disparities in how COVID has impacted society. Right? And like to print that and not remark on the fact that Kyrie Irving, who's done a lot of really good things for Black communities across America, to point to kind of just not mention the fact that his stance is completely at odds with something else that he purports to stand for and where he has put money into. It's completely irresponsible, right? And printing that uncritically is an absolute failure of journalism because it doesn't reflect what is actually going on. It's a press release masquerading as journalism.
Right. And so when we've dealt with serious issues in the past in hockey, I've thought several times you'll get these very serious stories and it'll seem like only Rick Westhead or Katie Baker are reporting on it.
Katie Strang, I think you mean.
Katie Strang, sorry. And so you get these stories that are significant, that are important, that are just not discussed, or that are kind of treated in a trivial way by journalists with like a wider reach. And I don't think hockey is generally as extreme as what you see sometimes in the NFL, where ESPN, I mean, they just had a debacle of their own on this, where a prominent ESPN reporter sent a story on labor negotiations to a management source, sent him the whole thing and said, does this look okay to you? Which you're never supposed to do. But yeah, like I think you see it in hockey, absolutely, where the influence of we get to be on the inside and talk to the people really colors the reporting and really shades it in a way that probably does people a disservice when they have to talk about something serious. Like, I'm not even just talking about the day-to-day stuff, like Eric Francis, who I think is absolutely terrible, or a reporter for the Calgary Flames, and he'll say whatever they want him to say, basically. But then you had a situation where Calgary was negotiating with the city for a new arena, and as with most sports teams, they were trying to take them to the cleaners, and Francis was out there pontificating basically for the team's position. I like, that's the basic takeaway here, is like all this inside stuff is good, it's fun, we all, I read LeBrun stuff, I like Elliot Friedman, I read his stuff too, but it's like, that does have an impact. And it's always about striking a balance where you maintain enough independence to occasionally say, okay, no, that's bullshit, and I'm not going to go along with it. I'm not going to print it uncritically.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was basically our bad take of the week.
It was so bad that we had to reach into the NBA and pull it out, but I think it has some general relevance.
No,
so.
it absolutely does. And, I mean, we saw this, and this was a source of much frustration. Again, this is far more trivial, of course, but with the Mitch Marner contract negotiation, where, various media sources were kind of like uncritically printing Marner camp press releases of like, well, why isn't Mitch Marner as good as Austin Matthews? And it's like, well, you fucking know why. You just fucking watch him. Right? Like, that was so that was like, I forget where the saying is from, but like, there's a saying of like, the energy spent to refute like a unit of metric of like bullshit is disproportionately higher than the energy it takes to just produce it. Right? And that's what that entire summer felt like.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that Dreger would say, I'm reporting on the investigation, on the negotiation, excuse me, that's a very different thing. I'm reporting on the negotiation accurately, which he was doing in a sense, like he wasn't saying things that weren't true. He wasn't
Yeah.
making stuff up, but the fact was that he was basically a bullhorn for Marner's position in that negotiation. Well, that does shade your reporting. If only by virtue of here are the things that you have information to talk about.
And that's also interesting because we spent a lot of this talking about there's like an inherent management view of sports,
Yeah.
right? And this is actually a situation where the uncritical, well, both the Irving and Marner things, and again, very clear, very, very different levels of severity here, at very, very different levels of importance. Both of them are kind of, as you said, bullhorns for agents, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, typically we think of beat writers as carrying water for management, but it's happening more and more that players and player, reps are realizing the power of playing the same game with their own reporters.
Which, from their perspective, I get it. And
Yeah,
there is also an issue here of how management thinking shades a lot of, and the truth is, this applies to us.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, the more you think about the salary cap, you're invested in the success of the team, first and foremost. Well, you inevitably have a management perspective in a league like this, where, from our point of view, we're thinking Mitch Marner should make less money, because that would open more space to sign better players, and then the team is better. From Mitch Marner's position, it's, I work my ass off, I'm an elite player, I can get this money, I should get it. And so, I don't hold it against him personally by any means that he pursued this negotiation. But we do have to be aware that that management perspective colors everything that we hear, including us. And now you're saying, player agents have started to realize, okay, this is one way for us to push back. And it hasn't necessarily led to more accuracy. It's just led to more stenography.
Yep. So I think that's just about everything we wanted to cover. Anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. So thank you to everyone for listening. We're going to be back to our weekly schedule with the Leaf season. So you can look forward to more of our stuff, every Sunday. So again, thank you for listening. You can catch all of mine and Fullman's work at pensionplanpuppets.com and all of the rest of our amazingly talented set of writers there. You can also catch Fullman and I on Twitter at ATFullman and RV. I reverse the order to what I usually do, but I'm definitely not going to re-record this outro. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.